I've just started recording the session, juste pour vous aviser que je viens de commencer l'enregistrement de la session ce soir. I'm also just going to share my screen here. Great. So we'll get started. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on what time zone you're joining from. I'm Andrea Savanin, Assistant Dean of Admissions and Recruitment at the Faculty of Law. Merci à tout le monde d'être avec nous aujourd'hui en format virtuel. Thanks to everyone for joining us today virtually. Before beginning, I'd like to acknowledge that Mcgill University's downtown campus is located on the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, one of the founding nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Archaeological records and oral history tell us that Tiohtià:ke, the place we now know today as Montreal, has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and New Credit nations. As the descendant of settlers to this place, I recognize the role played by my family's history in perpetuating the structural harms caused by colonialism. As a member of the admissions committee of the Faculty of Law, I'm also in many ways a gatekeeper, and I will continue to commit to the ongoing work necessary to move the legal profession, this institution, and the Canadian landscape towards true and authentic reconciliation. Comme vous le savez déjà, probablement, le programme de droit Mcgill est fièrement bilingue, alors la présentation se fera en anglais et en français ce soir. The presentation will be given in both English and French, and you can ask your questions in either language. A little bit about me before we get started. I'm a Mcgill alumna several times over. I did a BA at the School of Environment here at Mcgill before completing a master's degree at Concordia University in geography, after which I came back to Mcgill to complete my law degrees, a BCL, LLB at the time. I practiced law as in-house counsel for nearly 4 years at Canadian National Railway, mainly in the areas of Aboriginal and environmental law, before returning to my alma mater in my current role. I graduated from the law program in 2014. And so while much has changed since that time, I do have a good sense of what life as a Mcgill law student is like. So feel free to ask me any questions about that. Donc, la session de ce soir sera enregistrée, mais vos web caméras et vos microphones sont désactivés de façon automatique, donc vous resterez anonyme. Veuillez, s'il vous plaît, nous poser vos questions via la fonction Q&A ou la fonction chat. Vous pouvez les poser à n'importe quel moment durant la séance, mais nous ne répondrons pas avant la fin de la session pendant la période de questions. C'est possible que ma collègue Kelly Hanley partagerait des liens et de courtes réponses avec vous pendant la session, mais nous allons passer au travers toutes vos questions en plus de détails vers la fin de la séance. We're going to start with an overview of the Bcljd program at the faculty, and I'm going to provide you some information about the structure of the program, student life, and a little bit about what support you'll have as a student from the Career Development Office. Après ça, je passerai plusieurs minutes à vous expliquer notre politique d'admission ainsi que notre processus d'admission. Et avant de terminer avec la période de questions, j'inviterai notre étudiante ambassadrice ce soir à nous adresser la parole. I wanted to say that I'm joined this evening by my colleague from the Admissions Office, Senior Admissions Coordinator Kelly Hanley, and Stephanie Kay, who is one of our student ambassadors. So they will be helping with the session this evening. So to get started and provide you with an overview of the Bcljd program at the Faculty of Law. And I've included here sort of the tagline, the quote that we use at the faculty, so inspiring legal leadership for global challenges, fièrement enracinés à Montréal, nous rayonnons dans le monde. So it gives you a little bit of idea of the sort of the philosophy at the faculty. So our faculty is the oldest law faculty in Canada. The faculty has an excellent reputation, both nationally and internationally, and has ranked within the top 20 law schools in the world in the last 3 years, according to the Times Higher Education, and 31st, according to the QS World University Rankings. We have an integrated bilingual Bcljd program that was implemented in September of 1999 with a pretty substantial curriculum renewal in fall 2016. And so the fundamental concepts of civil law and common law and Indigenous legal traditions are taught in integrated courses in both English and French. So this is what we call the trans-systemic way of teaching, very comparative, pluralistic. In 2016, with the curriculum renewal, there were more trans-systemic courses introduced, a course in Indigenous legal traditions, integration workshop, and focus weeks. And then as of the fall 2020 cohort, there's now a mandatory first-year Indigenous legal traditions course. So this is a course that's taken in the first year, and I'll chat a little bit more about that in a moment. There are myriad experiential learning opportunities, which I'll go over as well. But just to give you a sort of a sneak preview, clerkships, journals, legal clinics, and mooting are all examples of the different opportunities available to students at the faculty. So all students will graduate with both BCL and JD degrees, and this opens the door to practicing law in any jurisdiction across Canada, as well as some states in the US, including New York and Massachusetts. And then some jurisdictions internationally as well, including France, if you have written the Barreau du Québec. But what I say is it's always important, sort of before you even think about starting law school, to check with a jurisdiction in which you might want to practice, just to get an idea of what the bar entry eligibility requirements are for practicing. So for a number of states in the US, for example, they do require that you have a completed bachelor's degree in addition to your JD to be able to practice. So something to keep in mind. And our degree sort of opens, our dual degree program opens the doors to a number of traditional and non-traditional career avenues. And I'll sort of speak to this a bit later. But I think I'm a good example of someone who's taken a little bit of a non-traditional career path. I started in law, and I'm now working in a capacity where I use my legal training and my legal knowledge in interesting ways, but I'm not a practicing lawyer per se. So let's have a bit of an overview of the Bcljd program structure and what students should expect to complete throughout the progress of their degree. So during the first year of the Bcljd program, students will be introduced to Integration Week and workshops, which is meant to be an introduction to the faculty and your legal studies. So this is really something that happens in the first week of your time at the Faculty of Law. It's a mandatory week, and it's part of the integration workshop courses. The workshops provide an opportunity for groups of students of roughly 15 to 20, and a tutorial leader who is an upper year student to work through assignments and develop skills such as legal writing, legal drafting, and responsive public speaking, among others. After Integration Week, you would begin your 1L courses, which are required and may only be taken in the first year. So you have a total of 7 first-year required courses, including contractual obligations, extra contractual obligations or torts, criminal justice, Indigenous legal traditions, the integration workshop, constitutional law, and foundations. Tous les cours de première année sont obligatoires et s'entendent sur toute l'année, à l'exception du cours sur les traditions juridiques autochtones, offert uniquement au trimestre automne, et le cours de fondement du droit, offert uniquement au trimestre d'hiver. Les étudiants de première année ne sont autorisés à suivre que les cours obligatoires de première année. During the second year, students will be required to take their mandatory 2L courses, which include judicial institutions and civil procedure, property law, which is a year-long course, advocacy, and legal ethics and professionalism. These required courses may be only taken during your second year. Students may also take law complementary courses and law electives, such as focus week courses, in addition to the second year required courses. And I'll be discussing this further in the next slide. During the third and fourth year, students may elect to go on exchange through our student exchange program or take part in legal clinics, student clerkships, human rights internships, and competitive mooting. Most of these are only available after the completion of all 1L and 2L courses, except the human rights internship, which is available to 1L students in the summer term. So after you finish your 1L, you can do this human rights internship before your second year starts. In addition, students can undertake a capstone project in the last 2 terms of the program, which is meant to provide an opportunity for reflection on their trajectory as a jurist towards the end of the student's formal education at the faculty, and can be undertaken using various modes of communication, including but not limited to academic writing. Your third and fourth year usually corresponds to the final year of our program, depending on the number of credits taken per term, and I'll talk a little bit about sequencing in a moment. Our students can always reach out to one of our SAO advisors. So the SAO at the faculty is the Student Affairs Office. It's really the office that helps current students. And these advisors ensure that not only they will have completed the total number of degree requirements of 105 credits, but also that they've completed all of their mandatory courses, their writing requirements, and their basket courses. So these are the courses that are offered in the civil law tradition and the common law tradition. In terms of an overview of the Bcljd program, so it is a total of 105 credits. Students complete their courses in 4 required general areas, including civil law, common law, social diversity, human rights, and Indigenous law, and administrative law. They also take elective courses in multiple fields of law, sampling widely, or going deeper in a specific interest area. En termes de l'apprentissage par expérience, j'en ai parlé un peu plus tôt, mais les étudiants et étudiantes peuvent acquérir de l'expérience pratique au cours du programme Bcljd grâce à diverses activités d'apprentissage expérientiel, incluant les cours de plaidoirie, auxiliaires juridiques, cliniques juridiques, les échanges, les revues de droit et les stages en droit de la personne. Students learn to solve legal problems in areas of rapid change that have no single right answer or areas that have many right answers. And intensive focus week workshops given by practicing professionals introduce students to current topics like election law, anatomy of a deal, wrongful convictions, thinking like an innovator, and la rédaction juridique. And I just found out that this year's focus, or this fall's focus week, which is coming up in a few weeks, is offering a new course this year called the Billable Hour, which I think is a really practical course that students can take to learn a little bit more what it's like to bill hours once they're full-time lawyers. En termes de la durée du programme, le programme de 105 crédits est l'occasion d'apprendre les traditions de droit civil et de common law dans le cadre d'un seul et même programme d'études intégré, dont les étudiants peuvent le compléter en 3 ans, 3 ans et demi ou 4 ans selon le cheminement individuel et les options choisies. You need to plan to ensure that you not only complete the 105 credits, but that you complete your mandatory courses, your writing requirement, and your basket courses. Et comme j'ai dit plus tôt, les étudiants et étudiantes qui terminent le programme obtiennent un double diplôme de droit civil, BCL, et de common law, JD, ou Juris Doctor. C'est vrai qu'il est possible d'accélérer l'achèvement du programme en 3 ans en complétant des crédits d'été et en prenant un nombre plus élevé de crédits pendant l'année universitaire régulière, jusqu'à un maximum de 18 crédits. Vous devriez commencer à planifier à la fin de votre première année si vous souhaitez terminer le programme en 3 ans. Pour le cheminement de 3 ans et demi, à un rythme normal de 15 crédits par trimestre, le programme peut être achevé en 7 trimestres. Et la plupart de nos étudiants et étudiantes choisissent ce cheminement régulier pour achever leurs études. Furthermore, students may also wish to enrich the program by adding on a minor, such as in arts, science, or management, a major. So we have 2 that are offered at the faculty, commercial law or international human rights, or the honors programs. All 3 options entail additional credits, extending the program to 4 years. We also offer 2 joint programs, including the Bcljd and Masters of Business Administration and the Bcljd and Masters of Social Work. The joint programs have separate admissions processes and must be done at the same time as admission to the Bcljd or within your first year of law. And students who are interested in pursuing any of these options are encouraged to meet with a student advisor at the Student Affairs Office. In terms of what you might do as a law student outside of all of the different courses that I just covered and all of the different program requirements, the faculty has an extremely rich student life and community. And I would say that most folks get involved in any number of different activities, many, few. I've included some of the different ways that students get involved at the faculty. So we have different clubs, we have different experiential learning opportunities. There are the law journals. Coffee house is a really popular activity. It's more of a social gathering that happens every Thursday at the faculty. And I actually found out today during a meeting that the Faculty of Law has a record whopping number of 57 different student clubs right now. So really there's something for everybody. I guarantee it. And as a former student, I can speak to how these experiential sort of outside of the normal course of a program, these opportunities can really make your time at the faculty that much more interesting. We have a very, very supportive career development office at the faculty who facilitates recruitment and interview processes for a range of employers and are actively always trying to develop new relationships with potential and current employers across Canada and internationally. So they have relationships and maintain relationships with future employers such as law firms, governments, local and international nonprofit organizations, and businesses. And these different employers are located really around the world. So obviously locally in Montreal and Quebec City, across Canada, Toronto, Ottawa, and other cities in Ontario, in the West Coast, Calgary, Vancouver, and East Coast, Halifax and St. John's. And then further afield in the US and other international locations, Paris, London, Hong Kong, and Singapore. The Career Development Office plans a number of different events annually. So they have their career days, which highlight diverse career options, on-campus interviews, during which employers in Toronto, Ottawa, and some US cities will actually come to the faculty and interview select Mcgill Law students. There are various networking and mentoring events where students can, show their enthusiasm, make contacts, and find employment prospects with different kinds of employers. There are workforce readiness workshops, career interest exploration, CV writing, interview preparation, networking skills. These are the kinds of workshops that the CDO runs. They also have one-on-one career advising to explore a student's interests and develop an application strategy. And of course, there are many, many student organized events where students and the Career Development Office partner to hold events such as speed meets with professionals at different kinds of employers. So overall, the Career Development Office at the faculty is really the place where you would go to get the kinds of information, advice, chat about future prospects. And they really encourage students to start thinking about these things right, from day one at the faculty. They're very supportive of any and all kinds of career aspirations. I would say that 90% of our graduates straight out of graduation will go into the markets that are highlighted on the slide here. So law firms, governments, local and international nonprofits, and businesses. So, most of our graduates will start out, but 5 years after graduation, up to 30% are dispersed even further. So kind of, again, using their law degrees in unique ways that's not necessarily practicing law. So I mentioned clerkships. This is something that is quite popular at the faculty. There are different kinds of clerkships. This is just one of the examples of an experiential learning opportunity for students for which you can get credit, either in course or you can pursue after graduation as a way to fulfill your articling requirements, which is the process by which most jurisdictions will require you to become a full-fledged member of a bar association. So in terms of in-course clerkships, so en français, les clerkships sont les auxiliaires juridiques. They're just an example of the depth of the Mcgill network in providing exceptional learning opportunities for students. And so in-course clerkships, we have the Cour d'appel du Québec, Cour supérieure du Québec, Cour du Québec, Chambre civile, Chambre criminelle, Chambre de la jeunesse, Tribunal administratif du Québec, Bureau de décision et révision en valeur mobilière, Cour municipale de la Ville de Montréal, Cour du Québec, du district du Laval, Laurentides, Lanaudière, so really throughout the province. So those are in-course clerkships for which you would work one-on-one with a judge and get credit for the courses. And then, of course, after graduation, a number of our grads will go to clerk at the Supreme Court of Canada, the Court of Appeal of Ontario, Quebec Court of Appeal, Federal Court and Tax Court, Federal Court of Appeal, Superior Court of Ontario, and even internationally. So there are some tribunals internationally that we have graduates go on to do clerkships at, including the Permanent Court of Arbitration, International Court of Justice, Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And there are many benefits that you would get through a clerkship opportunity, but some of these include gaining insight into oral and written advocacy, court procedures, and the judicial decision-making process. You obviously are going to develop excellent research, writing, and reasoning skills, which are going to be applicable for any legal career afterwards. And at some course, clerks at some courts, clerks actually have the opportunity to consider and learn about policy issues as well as legal issues. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely something to consider when you're looking at law schools. Do they have these kinds of opportunities? And once you're a student, sort of pursuing those. And I will take a moment here to say that at the Supreme Court of Canada, we have a really, really great representation from McGill law grads, and 22% of the Supreme Court of Canada law clerks in the last 5 years were McGill law grads. So we have good showing there. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit at this point and start talking about how to prepare for a McGill law application. I know that's probably why many of you are here this evening with us. Donc, la demande d'admission en droit. Quelques conseils pratiques pour vous. Avant de postuler, posez-vous les questions suivantes. Quelles sont vos motivations pour étudier le droit? Quelles sont les forces et les faiblesses potentielles de votre candidature? Dans quel environnement voulez-vous étudier? Quelle faculté de droit serait la meilleure pour vous? Il y a d'excellentes facultés de droit au travers le Canada et partout dans le monde. Donc, c'est très important de bien faire vos recherches sur la nôtre. Et j'ai mis les handles pour plusieurs de nos médias sociaux pour en apprendre davantage sur notre communauté et nos activités. Et je vous suggère fortement de les consulter. C'est très important que vous soyez convaincu que Mcgill soit la meilleure place pour vous afin de soyez convaincante dans votre demande d'admission. Très important de bien lire notre site Internet avant de nous contacter avec vos questions. Et un autre point que je vais mentionner maintenant, et je l'ai mis sur la diapo, ne vous fiez pas aux informations dans les forums. So please don't rely on the information that you read in the law school forums online. Many of this information is inaccurate, it's based on urban legends. Really, we are the #1 resource for you to contact with all of your questions. Nous sommes là pour vous aider. J'ai mis notre adresse courriel sur la diapo et vers la fin de la présentation, je vais mettre quelques autres options pour nous contacter. Donc, n'hésitez pas à nous appeler, venir nous voir en personne, nous envoyer un courriel pour poser toutes vos questions. In terms of eligibility requirements for the program itself, I'm going to talk about education, and then I'm going to talk about the bilingualism requirement. And I know that this is a question that I receive all the time from most students when I meet folks when I'm out on the road doing my recruitment events. So in terms of education requirements, to be eligible to apply to the program, you have to have either a DEC or a Quebec French baccalaureate from the two institutions, Marie de France and Stanislas. These are two institutions in Quebec, or a DEC and at most 30 credits of university studies. So the first two bullet points are very relevant for folks who would be applying straight out of Cégep or a QFB program. Most of our applicants are going to be applying with a university education under their belt or in the process of being completed. So to apply from university, you need to have 60 credits of university studies at least. But the reality of the thing is that we very, very, very rarely admit students who are not on track to be completing their degree by the time they would start at the Faculty of Law. You're just far less competitive than the rest of the pool, and you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice by not finishing your current degree for a number of reasons. I talked early on in the presentation about the fact that some jurisdictions, especially those in the United States, require you to have a completed undergraduate degree in addition to a JD to be eligible to practice. So you would be sort of limiting your mobility options in the future. But also, if you start your law studies and you realize that it's not for you, you don't have another degree to fall back on. So I think it's really important before applying, if you're not going to be completing your law degree, to think long and hard about the reasons why you're doing that. In my time as assistant dean, I started in 2018. I have never admitted someone who was not in the process of finishing their undergraduate degree, who is applying in this category. I'm not talking about the Cégep and the QFB applicants. So again, think about the reasons why you might be trying to sort of fast track getting into law school. In terms of bilingualism, we do have a passive bilingualism policy at the faculty. So this sort of translates to a high intermediate comprehension in both French and English, so DELF B2 for French, and fluency, comprehension, expression in one of the two languages. So you either have to be fluent in English with the high intermediate comprehension in French, or vice versa. The reason why we require passive bilingualism is because of the readings in civil law and in all courses may be in French. And so it's really important for you to be able to understand what you're reading. Also, a number of your colleagues and a number of faculty members are Francophone. And so they're going to be, you know, speaking with their colleagues and students and classmates in French. The dean himself sends communications to students that are very much presented in franglais, so, you know, partially in English, partially in French, not necessarily an English version of one and a French version of the other. So to really be able to get the most out of your time at the faculty, it's extremely important that you have the level that's required. We don't offer, you know, language courses. Once you're at the faculty, we're really expecting you to come in with that knowledge already. I would say that most students, once they leave, they're sort of better in the second language than when they started, but that's really just as a result of being exposed while they're at the faculty. Even if you ended up taking all of your classes in English or in French, you would always be able to submit all of your graded assignments and assessments in either French or English. So that's a policy at the university itself. You can choose the language of instruction of your courses. However, because of an increased demand for the English sections, most students in their first year will end up taking at least one of their courses in French. So that's something to think about. And as a graduate of the faculty, I am a proud Québécoise, but I'm an Anglophone, and I had not taken any French courses in the 6 years prior to starting at the Faculty of Law. And it was a humbling moment. The level of French, it's professional level, right? So a good way to sort of get a sense of what level you might be exposed to would be take a look at some Supreme Court judgments, see if you can understand them, see if you can get through them. Maybe start thinking about listening to some podcasts, watching some news in French, or reading the news in French, just to kind of determine whether or not you'd be comfortable. And I'm speaking mostly about French here because that's the biggest kind of concern that applicants have when they're applying, especially from outside of Quebec. So in terms of how your bilingualism is assessed for the 2023 admission cycle, so for folks who are currently applying and who are planning on starting in September 2023, we're going to assess this by looking at the information that's declared in your application form itself. So you're prompted to answer some questions about your level of proficiency. You're also prompted, if you so choose, to add information or to upload information, proof, transcripts, that sort of thing, demonstrating that you've taken French courses or French training. You don't need to submit separate transcripts. For example, if you've taken courses in your university, we would already see these in the transcripts that you're going to be providing, so you don't need to duplicate those again. This would really be if you've taken training through an organization such as Alliance Française or the Explore program, and you could submit the transcript or the certificate or the details of that program separately. So we would be looking at that information. We're also going to be looking at information in your CV about whether or not you've worked in French or English, whether or not you have any volunteer experience, maybe have lived abroad for a little while in a French-speaking country. And then we'll also ask your referees to speak to your level of French to the extent that they're able to. For the 2024 admission cycle, so for those who are listening to this session, either now in person or at a later date, for folks who are thinking of applying for 2024 September, we will have a new process that's going to be implemented for that next cycle, with specific forms of proof being required to demonstrate the required level, with certain exemptions. So folks who are coming from the Quebec High School or Cégep program, They will not necessarily have to submit separate documentation, but we have all of the information about the forms of proof that we're going to be looking for the 2024 cycle on our website. So I encourage you, if you're really planning far ahead and you're thinking of applying in 2024, please take a look at that information to make sure you're ready and to make sure you're planning, because a lot of the times we get folks who apply and say, oh, I did French immersion in high school outside of the province. And, you know, I did a B2 at that time, but it's been 5 years since I've done those courses and I haven't really kept them up. We're really going to be looking for evidence that you've continued to use your French abilities after you've completed your French immersion high school diploma. So, you know, whether that be a university course, whether you've worked in French or volunteered in French. So just think about what you might need to do to plan ahead. If there's any question as to your level of French proficiency, we will follow up with a phone call where we do some testing. If necessary, we're going to ask you a series of questions in French, and you could answer them in either language, French or English, but it's really, again, to test the level of comprehension that you have. It's never going to be about expression at the faculty. It's really about whether or not you can understand, you know, a text or when someone's speaking to you. The reality is that if you're applying to the Faculty of Law and, you know, you just don't have the level of French that is an eligibility requirement, you will be refused on that basis alone. It doesn't matter how strong your GPA is. It doesn't matter how strong your Lsat is. We're really looking for students who are applying who are at the level now and not, you know, making an undertaking to take additional courses or do a stage in the summer or something of that sort. We're really wanting you to come in with that level so that you're able to integrate at the faculty from day one. The exception to what I've just said would be for folks who are applying who self-identify as Indigenous. Those students are eligible to apply for funding to allow for language training, and they're also eligible to apply for deferred admission to provide them a little bit more time to complete the required language courses. We do recognize that the imposition of the bilingualism requirement could mean that they're learning a second, a third, a fourth language, and could be perceived as a colonizing influence. And so we really do want to make sure that these folks are given the opportunity, if they don't feel like they have the level now, that they can tell us that, and we can provide them funding, and they can take some time to get themselves to the level, because we really are focused on increasing the number of Indigenous voices at the faculty. So if that's your situation, please, I encourage you to get in touch with my office, and we'd be very happy to chat a little bit more about that. Donc, je vais parler maintenant de notre politique d'admission à la faculté. La politique d'admission a pour objectif de retenir les candidats et candidates vraiment les plus aptes à étudier le droit dans l'environnement bilingue, comparatif et transsystémique, qui est très unique à Mcgill. L'excellence et la diversité sont vraiment essentielles à la faculté. En effet, nous estimons que l'excellence de notre faculté prend sa source dans la diversité de notre communauté. Donc, la faculté cherche des indicateurs tels que la curiosité intellectuelle, l'engagement communautaire, l'éveil, que ce soit culturel, économique, politique, social ou autre, la capacité de leadership, l'aptitude à travailler avec les autres, l'ouverture face à la diversité, la maturité, le sens éthique, le jugement et la faculté d'adaptation aux conditions tant positives que négatives. Donc, les candidats et candidates sont retenus sur la base d'une évaluation globale, holistique, du dossier d'admission, en tenant compte du dossier scolaire, les habiletés linguistiques, la lettre de motivation, la dissertation personnelle, de l'engagement parascolaire, communautaire ou professionnel, ainsi que des recommandations de chaque personne candidate. Donc, je vous invite de consulter notre site web qui décrit tous les documents justificatifs que vous devriez soumettre avec votre candidature. So we have I mentioned it, a holistic review process, which means that we don't have any academic cutoffs or thresholds, but a demonstration of academic excellence is still really essential to a successful application. And I would encourage you strongly to take a look at our website. We publish statistics every year to give a sense of how folks are doing when, how our incoming students have done in their undergraduate degrees. And, we publish our average and our median, but this year we've published a little bit more detail about, the number of folks who were admitted who had a CGPA of below a certain percentage, for example. So I think it's important when you're applying to law school to have the self-awareness to know, are you potentially going to be a strong enough candidate from an academic point of view to be able to excel in the rigors, or not even excel, just manage the day-to-day rigors of law school, because it's a very, very challenging program. And I think, speaking from experience, it's a very humbling program where, you're not going to necessarily be doing as well as you may have in your undergrad. So it's really important that you're ready for that academic undertaking. Donc ici sur la diapo, on parle un peu de la diversité de la classe en termes de géographie, ethnicité, votre programme d'études, votre langue maternelle, votre situation socio-économique. So the Faculty of Law really strives to create an incoming class with a diversity of backgrounds, profiles, and experiences, where each student is really able to make an important contribution to our faculty and the legal profession. So in particular, we welcome applications from Indigenous people, Black people, first-generation university students, people with disabilities, racialized people, 2S LGBTQ+ people, women, people from an economically disadvantaged background, and others who may have faced systemic barriers that impacted their access to education. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot of what our community at the faculty looks like. We don't have the stats yet from our incoming class this year. So this is from our 2021 incoming cohort. And so it really just demonstrates how the excellence of the faculty is rooted in principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our goal is not only to address and achieve proportional representation of different populations and different communities within the faculty based on the population of Canada, but also to address historical inequities in representation. We recognize that the law profession has excluded many voices for a long, long time, and we're trying to, correct that and bring those voices in, because they are important voices and they represent, the people that are going to be seeking legal advice later on. So Mcgill's strategic plan on equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as its plan to address systemic racism against the Black community, mandates better data collection and benchmarking so that we can improve representation of various groups who have been traditionally underrepresented in the legal community. So this reporting that we're doing here is in response to those mandates given to us by the university. And so these are just some of the statistics that we were able to collect for the 2021 cycle. I won't go through them individually, but you can see here that it's a very, very diverse learning community. And as a graduate of the faculty, I myself am the first in my family to attend university. I come from a low socioeconomic background, and it was really nice to see that represented in my classmates. It made me feel less like an outsider at the faculty, and just having different perspectives from my classmates around me, I think really enriched my learning experience, because they were able to ask questions that I would have never thought of, bring up issues, problems, solutions that I would have never thought of. And so, this is something that we're really focused on, and that we strive to kind of build on every year, and it's definitely evolving. So I spoke a little bit about academic competitiveness of the admissions process of the program. So again, we don't have the stats yet from the 2022 incoming cohort, so this is based on last year. But I wanted to just give a little bit of an overview. So last year, again, a bit of an anomaly year. We had a huge number of applications. Normally, we would receive somewhere around 1,500, but last year we received 1,782, which was about a 25% increase over the year prior. We made a total of 251 offers, and we had 181 students in our final class. The average cumulative GPA of our incoming class was an 85%. The average Lsat was a 164, and the average R score for Cégep students was 35.041. This 17% de la cohorte de l'année dernière étaient des étudiants et étudiantes provenant du cégep et 12% ont fait des études supérieures avant de commencer leurs études en droit, donc soit une maîtrise ou un doctorat. 39% of the class had written the Lsat. This is obviously excluding CEGEP students because they very rarely write. And the average age of the incoming class was 23, which is pretty much standard average age. I've included here on the right-hand side of the slide, just sort of a comparison. This is the information that we published in our brochure this year. So this is an average of the last couple of years. And what I really wanted to do was raise or flag this specific statistic sort of underneath this table. So on average, 80% of our incoming students have an undergrad average higher than 83% or, have an undergrad degree average of 83% or higher. And so on a 4.0 scale, this is somewhere around a 3.8, and 85% of those who wrote the Lsat scored 159 or higher. So this just gives you a bit of a sense of where our students are coming in at academically. I wanted to flag here some recent changes that we've made to our admissions process. Those of you who may have already started the application and who have potentially applied in a previous cycle will have noticed that things look a bit different. We're asking for some different information. So I'll go through these individually. I see that we're getting some questions coming in, and I saw someone who raised their hand. We won't take questions until the very end, but feel free to enter them in the chat and we'll cover them at the end of the session. So first change, we have moved to a new application system. So it's based on a system called Slate, but it's the Applicant Portal. And so this is what you're going to be working in now. It's no longer handled by Minerva, which was the central application system that we've used in the past, and that is still used by many other programs at Mcgill. Because of the new application system, we're now only accepting one version of all supporting documents, except for transcripts. So in the past, we would have allowed you to submit an updated version of a CV, but really now we're asking only for one version of those. And for transcripts, these, obviously it's important for the committee to see if you've taken any courses since you've applied. And so these you would have to contact our office to update in the system. Your referees are now prompted to complete the reference forms directly through the applicant portal. So they are no longer submitting them to our office. I apologize for those of you who in the last couple of days may have visited our website and were given conflicting information about that. There were some technical glitches with the website and it was reverted to a previous version that had all of the wrong information. So in the application form, you will be prompted to enter your referees and they will receive an automatic email from that system and they will submit all of their information that way. They will not email reference forms to our office. We will not be saving or downloading any reference forms that we receive. So we apologize for any confusion on that front. Applicants have to complete the admissions demographic survey directly through the applicant portal. So they're no longer submitting a separate document managed by our office. This was the process put in place last cycle, but it's no longer the case. So this is a page in the application. It's a mandatory page, but you can always answer, choose not to answer for any of those questions. We have a new optional applicant category for Indigenous candidates, and I'll talk a little bit about this later on. Applicants have to self-report their adjusted cumulative GPAs on a 4.0 scale, which is the scale used by Mcgill in their applications. It's no longer our office who is doing a conversion to the Mcgill scale, and we're no longer going to be looking at the grades on a percent scale. It's really on a 4.0 scale now. And so the application system itself has instructions on how to do this. There's an information video that you can listen or watch. It's a short YouTube video. I think it's about 4 minutes long that covers this, but there's also a separate page that we've linked to on our website that explains this all. CEGEP applicants must send us their transcripts directly. So we're no longer receiving these from the government. So before, that's it. CEGEP applicants would or CEGEP applicants would provide us with their permanent code, and we would get those transcripts, or Mcgill will get the transcripts from the government, and we would get a copy of those. That's no longer the case. So for anyone on the webinar this evening who is planning on applying as a CEGEP applicant, just be prepared to get a copy of your CEGEP transcripts and submit those directly to us. Applicants who wish to declare extenuating circumstances have to complete the form available on our applicant portal. So that's a new change. And the French version of the personal statement, donc la version française du personal statement, a été renommée la dissertation personnelle au lieu de la lettre de présentation personnelle parce que ça décrit mieux la nature et le but de ce document. So I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. Donc, je vais passer maintenant au travers tous les documents justificatifs qui font partie de la demande d'admission. I'm going to go over now all of the supporting documents that you have to submit as part of your application. Donc, on a les relevés de notes, so the transcripts, les recommandations, the 2 references, la dissertation personnelle que j'ai surlignée ici. So I've highlighted in French the dissertation personnelle, the personal statement in English. Le CV, so the CV, pretty self-explanatory, and the Lsat. And I'll chat more about each of these one by one. So to start with the transcripts and academic records, I wanted to just kick this off by saying that there is no specific or preferred DEC, so the Diplôme d'études collégiales, undergraduate degree, or field of study that is required to apply. There's no sort of pre-law degree that you can do or preferred degree that we have. We really love to receive applications from folks who have studied any number of degrees in the past, or any number of subjects. We've had people come in with engineering degrees, with political science degrees, with English degrees, with education, with performing arts degrees, business, really anything and everything under the sun. What I would say though, is it's always helpful for us to see that you've taken courses that require, a certain number or a certain amount of reading and writing, because those are obviously skills that are going to be very important in law school. And so, sometimes for those of you who might be studying pure sciences, where you don't necessarily have those kinds of essay-based or research-based courses, it's good to demonstrate that you would have taken them, or maybe get a reference from a professor in a course that has required that kind of an assessment, so they can speak to those things. We are looking for a complete academic record of all your post-secondary studies, including any exchanges or transfer credits, summer programs. Need not worry if these courses were not taken in Canada. We're very used to international transcripts. And so really it's just about submitting all of the sort of evidence that you have of any courses that you've taken. What the committee is going to be looking for in your transcripts is consistency in your performance over time. If there maybe isn't consistency, I, for one, did not do very well in my first year of my undergraduate. So, it wasn't necessarily consistent with how I did the rest of my degree, but there was progression. So they would be looking for progression or improvement in the courses, in your performance. They're going to be looking at the level of difficulty and the range of coursework that you've taken, your relative performance. So it's always really helpful to us when your transcripts show the averages of the classes that you've taken. I know not all schools offer this, but if you're able to provide us with a transcript that does, that's really, really helpful to the committee. Like I said before, we have no academic thresholds. There are no cutoffs. You're not automatically getting refused. Your file is always going to be looked at, but evidence of sustained academic excellence is really essential to a successful file. So, the committee is really going to be focusing in on those files that demonstrate that à la base. And it's also really important that you consider your competitiveness relative to the pool. So, keep that in mind when you're applying. And I'll talk a little bit more in a moment about maybe explaining why you didn't do so well in your undergraduate and why you think, or your DAC or any course of study, and why you think that might not represent your potential as a student. In terms of your supporting documents, we have a CV. So the CV is not a CV that you would be submitting with your application to a job. This is really a CV is tailored as appropriate to an application to law. We wanted to highlight your academic achievements, your achievements of both an academic and an extracurricular nature. Any and all work experience is relevant. So really, whether it's working as a member of a wait staff, working as a summer camp counselor, working as a manager at a fast food restaurant, working as an intern in a law firm, all of these things are relevant. They are all going to demonstrate to us some of the key attributes that we're going to be looking for in our law students. So leadership, ability to multitask, responsibility, ethical sense, these things. So, don't feel like you should omit something from your CV because you don't think it's maybe prestigious enough. It's rare that folks who are applying to law school actually have legal experience. So any and all work experience, please include that. It's always helpful to us if you include the number of hours that you've worked during the academic year, because that helps us get a sense of how you're able to multitask and balance priorities, that kind of thing. And we have a 2-page maximum requirement for the CV. So please keep that in mind. Just a comment about extracurricular and involvement in general. I always like to tell folks that it makes, what the committee is really going to be looking for is the quality of your engagements rather than the quantity, and to see that there's a connection between, a specific extracurricular, volunteer experience, committee, club. So a connection between that and maybe where you've come from and where you're going, rather than it just being something that you put on your CV because you feel like it looks great. And also just, don't try and get involved in so many different causes or interests that, you can't give your sustained, dedicated commitment to one or two causes where you maybe take on more of a leadership position. So quality versus quantity, and any and all work experience is relevant. If those are the only two things that you take away from this section, then that's great. Personal statement. This is a very, very important element of your application. And I would say probably the thing that you should be focusing on the most when you're preparing for your law school application. This is the document where we're going to see if you've answered, and the answers can be very explicit or they can be more nuanced, but the answers to 3 main questions, which are why law, why Mcgill law specifically, and why you. What are you going to be able to bring to the faculty? What will you contribute to the faculty and to the legal profession afterward? This is a document that should be authentic. It should be genuine. Yes, it should be original. But we also want it to feel like it's you. If you're someone who's never done creative writing and you all of a sudden decide to write your personal statement in the form of a poem, that might not go over so well for you unless you're some sort of savant, in which case it's great. But I would say just try and stick to what feels right for you. Choose your best language. Choose the language in which you feel most comfortable expressing yourselves. And for those of you who feel comfortable expressing yourselves in both, that's great, but choose one. I find personal statements that are sort of half in French, half in English are a bit more difficult to read because French and English writing are so different from each other. And so you don't necessarily need to use your personal statement to demonstrate your bilingualism. Again, the bilingualism requirement is really about comprehension, not expression. So I would say choose the language in which you're most comfortable and write the document in that. And if you want to submit your personal statement en français et ton CV et toute l'autre documentation en anglais, that's fine. Like you can mix it up. This should not be a summary of your CV or what's on our website. It should not be a summary of other information in your application. So for example, you don't need to start your personal statement by introducing yourself, your name, your field of study, your age, whatever it might be, unless you feel like that's extremely relevant, because we're going to know that, we're going to see that other information elsewhere in your application. And this document is short, right? It's 750 words. So we don't want you sort of taking up space uselessly with that kind of information. And in terms of not summarizing what's in your CV, don't sort of just repeat, oh, in first year I did this, and second year I did this, and that made me really interested in law. And I mean, obviously you can mention the things that are included in your CV, but you should really try and add value to what you're writing about in your personal statement. So elaborate on what you have in your CV rather than just repeating them. And also don't, you don't need to repeat what's on our website. We know that we have a unique transsystemic bilingual program. You don't need to say that about us. If you want to speak to those elements and kind of elaborate on them, when you're talking about the Mcgill component, then for sure, by all means, but you don't need to just leave it at that. I would say always add value. Pour les personnes candidates qui vont écrire en français, comme j'ai mentionné plus tôt, ce document est maintenant appelé la dissertation personnelle au lieu que la lettre de présentation personnelle. Nous avons décidé de changer le titre de ce document pour mieux décrire c'est quoi exactement le but de ce document. C'est-à-dire que ce volet de votre demande est vraiment plus un énoncé de vos motivations pour poursuivre vos études en droit qu'une vraie lettre de motivation que vous soumettriez avec une demande d'emploi, par exemple. Donc, gardez ça à l'esprit quand vous l'écrivez, même si c'est toujours une lettre ou un document formel. Les formules de politesse qu'on voit très souvent dans les lettres de présentation personnelle standard pour une demande d'emploi, par exemple, ne sont pas nécessaires ici. Par exemple, un en-tête avec votre adresse, une salutation formelle, etc. So that's what I would say for those folks who are writing in French. You should be very self-critical in this document. You should write a first draft, edit it, have a friend look at it, have a parent look at it, have maybe an advisor, an academic advisor, a career advisor, or a writing assistant's office at your institution look at it. If you feel close enough to ask one of your referees to look at it, that's always helpful as well. It's just good to get that external perspective on what you've written in your personal statement, because sometimes there are things that we miss. And it's really unfortunate when I see personal statements come in that have really obvious errors. So for example, they don't describe our program, they call it a Bcljd, LLJ or something, that we don't offer, unfortunately. Or they say, I'm writing because I really want to get into U of T, and I say, well, that's great for U of T, but not so great for your application to Mcgill Law. So just pay a lot of attention when you're writing this document. It's extremely important. And the last thing I'll say here at the end is that we really encourage applicants belonging to equity deserving groups to include information in their personal statements on how their personal circumstances, their lived experience, their work, their community involvement, and their extracurricular activities relate to their desire and preparation to study law at Mcgill University. This gives our committee a lot of context and just helps us fulfill some of those goals, like I was talking about earlier, of bringing in those voices that need to be at the law faculty and in the legal profession afterwards. So I mentioned 750 word maximum for this document, and it's really helpful for you to include your word count at the bottom of the page. Unless it's obvious that you're maybe, being a little bit untruthful with the word count, we're not going to go through and count word for word, but it's just helpful for us to make sure. So in terms of the other supporting documents, you have your references. So I mentioned this earlier, we look for 2 references. We prefer those to be academic. Professional references can sometimes be useful for us, especially if you've been out of school for some time, although make sure that who you're choosing to act as your referee is going to be able to provide the details about you that the law school is seeking. So review the guidelines on our website before selecting a reference so that you know you're choosing the right person. We ask pretty specific questions about academic abilities and personal attributes. So just make sure whoever you're asking is going to be able to answer. We want to see the most impressive reference, not the most impressive referee. And what I mean here is that some folks sometimes choose to include personal references from a very impressive or well-known friend or family member, for example, a judge or a member of parliament, and including them just because they happen to know this person on a personal level. These are less helpful for us because generally these individuals can't provide much more than just conjecture about the specific attributes that law schools are looking for in terms of academics, especially. So again, please check our website for what we look for in terms of format and content for references. So the Lsat, the Law School Admissions Test. So this is a standardized admissions test that all other common law, English common law faculties in Canada require for admission to law school, as well as the United States. So all the American Bar Association schools require the Lsat, again, as part of their standardized, it's a standardized test as part of their admissions process. So the Lsat is not required for admission to Mcgill, and the reason why we don't require it is because it's only offered in English, and it would put many of our Francophone applicants at a disadvantage in that sense. But we will consider your scores if you have written the Lsat, and so it's very important to disclose the fact that you have or will be writing the Lsat in your application. So we consider an average of your Lsat scores, but we will also look at progression, right? So if you've improved your score over time, this is something that committee is going to have access to. We use the average just to compare applicants to each other, but we will always be able to see all of your scores. So a lot of people ask me, well, should I write the Lsat? This is my CGPA. I can never tell you if it's right for you to write the Lsat. I mean, obviously, if you're applying to other schools and you want to potentially increase the chances of you getting into law school, then this is something that you need to think of. I didn't write the Lsat when I applied to Mcgill, but I've heard it's a very challenging test. It takes a lot of time to prepare for it. It's expensive, the prep courses, although LSAC, the organization that administers the Lsat, does provide some great free resources for folks who are applying or who are preparing to write the Lsat exam. But sometimes an Lsat can help if your academics, if your CGPA is maybe a little bit lower than the average, and you have a strong Lsat, it can sometimes help alleviate some of the concerns that the committee might have about your academic abilities. The LSAT is intended and has been proven to provide a good predictor of how you might perform in your first year of your law studies. But it is a standardized test, and I can tell you from my time at Mcgill Law that this is not the form of testing that the faculty has in place. So it tells us something, but it doesn't tell us everything. And as you saw with our statistics earlier, only about 40% of our admitted students have written the Lsat. So if you are thinking of writing the Lsat, we encourage you to write the November exam. We will accept the January exam as the latest for the upcoming admission cycle, but this means that we won't get your results until about February sometime, which will delay the review of your file. And so because we make offers on a rolling basis, this could mean that there have been many offers made before we even get to your file. So again, if you're thinking of applying for next September, we recommend the latest exam as the November test date. We will accept the January test date, but just think about how that might impact the review of your file. Okay, so in terms of some additional supporting documents, there's a lot of information on this slide. It's about the Extenuating Circumstances form. And this is where applicable, you can use this document to explain a potential weakness of your application caused by medical or personal difficulties. And there is a form on our website that you would be prompted to fill if you said that you wanted to declare that you wanted to declare extenuating circumstances that lists the specific situations that would apply. It's not just that, you were in your first year of university and you didn't really know what you were doing or who you were as a person, and you sort of fluffed off and you didn't really focus. That's not a good reason. It really has to be something medical or personal. But it could explain, you know, poor grades, a low Lsat score, an absence from school. You know, we all have situations that we go through at one time or another that impact our performance to varying degrees. And so we really want you to be able to use this document so that you can focus more in your personal statement about those things that I talked about earlier. So this is a mandatory form that you have to complete through the Applicant Portal, and it will require you to identify the semesters and or years that were affected by the specific situation that you want to declare. And so rather than you just saying, oh, well, throughout my undergraduate, I didn't do very well because, again, I wasn't focusing or I didn't really like what I was studying, it really helps us identify the specific semesters or years that were impacted, which can help us in certain circumstances readjust your CGPA so that it better reflects your true academic potential. So we would omit grades from the impacted semesters, and this is really done at the discretion of the admissions office based on the nature and relevance of the situation that you've declared. So supporting documentation can be submitted and will be obviously handled as personal and confidential, but candidates should be aware that the admissions office staff who are reviewing these documents are not medical professionals, right? I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. And so the probative value, so the evidentiary value that these documents will have for us, you know, it's great to know that you had actually gone to seek professional guidance, but you don't necessarily need to submit a 40-page report on a specific test that you may have taken that demonstrated a certain result. So some evidence is certainly helpful, but you know, we are sort of taking for granted that if you are declaring a situation that's serious enough to call it an extenuating circumstance, that you are doing so truthfully. And so we're not necessarily going to, except in very specific cases, we may ask for additional documentation. So just keep that in mind when you're submitting any supporting documents for this element. Okay, I'll turn now to our new optional category for Indigenous applicants. So to be eligible to apply in this optional category, an applicant has to self-identify as an Indigenous person who has ties to Turtle Island, so broadly North America, so including First Nations, status or non-status, Inuit and Métis in Canada, as well as Native Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Alaskan Natives in the United States. So again, this is something that you would be prompted to choose if you wanted to on the application form. We don't ask for specific forms of, you know, proof of membership in a community. We're not going to ask for a band status card or a document demonstrating membership in a tribe in the United States or a Métis organization in Canada. We're really, again, taking at face value that what you're going to be including in your application is true. So all of the document requirements that I spoke about before are going to apply to this category. Anyone who's applying who would otherwise be eligible to apply in the university category, so with the November 1st deadline, that deadline would be the applicable one for them. If a person who was also eligible for this category was coming from CEGEP, the March 1st deadline would be the one applicable to them. So more information about sort of that element of it can be found on our website, but I wanted to today talk a little bit more in depth about the nuances to some of the supporting documents that we have. So for the references, I mentioned earlier that it's helpful to us to have two academic references, preferably. For folks who are applying in the optional Indigenous applicant category, one of those references may be a letter from an individual who can speak to an applicant's connection to an Indigenous community or communities or organizations, or where the connection doesn't exist because of the historical impacts of colonialism, an applicant's goals for supporting the Indigenous communities and concerns, and the relationship between those goals and their motivations to study law. So this is the way in which we're getting folks who are applying in this category to demonstrate that connection. Again, it's not about specific forms of proof, you know, in the form of a band status card, but it's really about establishing that there is a connection there, or if, again, the connection has been severed over, you know, generations, the desire to rekindle that connection and rebuild it. So one of the referees can be someone who can speak to that. In terms of the personal statement, again, this is the theme, the connection theme. This is what we're going to be looking for folks who are applying in this category. And because we're asking them to elaborate on this a bit more, the word limit for this applicant category for the personal statement increases to 1,200 words from 750. So candidates in this category are encouraged to use their personal statement to, talk about the things that I mentioned before, but also to address one or more of the following. So their substantive connections to Indigenous communities and organizations, or if these connections do not yet exist, the kind of meaningful efforts they'll be undertaking to build these connections. The extent they are currently engaged in their cultures and legal traditions, the role that plays in their lives and how it bears upon their application to law school, to the extent that they have been affected by the historical and structural effects of colonialism, the ways in which that reality bears upon their application, and how they intend exactly to use their legal education to support the flourishing of Indigenous communities, organizations, or legal traditions. So there's a lot there, and we encourage applicants to, again, answer one of these, answer all of them. We're going to be hosting an information session specifically for Indigenous prospective applicants next week. So October 6th, 2022, there's more information about that on our website, on our recruitment page. So if you want to attend, we would very much like to see you there. We're hosting a hybrid session. So it's going to be both in person at the faculty and also broadcast over Zoom. We're going to have a current law student at the faculty who is from the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, so Kahnawake, which is just across the bridge here from Montreal. He's a 3L at the faculty. And we're also having Professor Aaron Mills, who is an Anishinaabe scholar. He's going to be participating as well. So I'll go a little bit more in depth into the application itself, the sort of the rationale for why we created this applicant category. And they're each going to talk a bit about the ways in which the faculty has been trying to increase the voices of Indigenous individuals and legal traditions at the faculty, and sort of the ways in which that's played out in the last couple of years. Dernier volet de cette partie de la présentation, c'est sur la procédure d'entrevue. Donc, pour les entrevues, sont obligatoires pour tous ceux et celles qui sont peut-être considérés admissibles du cégep, et quelques autres candidats ou candidates, le cas échéant, comme par exemple des personnes matures. Les entrevues sont environ 25 minutes. Et elles se font en présence de 2 membres de la faculté de façon bilingue pour déterminer si le niveau de compréhension existe pour cette personne candidate. Dans les dernières années, on les a faites par vidéoconférence, évidemment à cause de la pandémie, mais ça se peut que pour la prochaine session, en mars, avril et mai, l'année prochaine, on va les offrir en présentiel encore une fois, mais donc c'est ça, restez à l'affût pour plus d'informations à cet égard. Les questions qui sont posées pendant les entrevues sont variées. Le but de ce volet du processus d'admission, c'est vraiment de déterminer si la personne candidate a des compétences que nous cherchons. Donc, l'esprit analytique, une curiosité, une bonne communication orale, soit en anglais ou français, par exemple. Et les entrevues ont lieu normalement en mars, avril et en mai. Des fois en juin, mais normalement dans les mois du printemps. I'm going to chat a little bit here about scholarships and financial aid. So some of you may already be aware of the Mcbean Scholars Program at the faculty. This is a really exciting scholarship opportunity for folks who are both from Canada, but also international as well. This is the first year that international candidates are being considered in this competition. So Mcbean Scholars Program is a separate sort of program that is available to folks who are applying to any graduate program at Mcgill, as well as the professional programs, so dentistry, medicine, and law. They apply separately. It's a totally separate application process. They ask for different things. I think a nomination from your home school, but we work very closely in tandem with the organization who will tell us, okay, these are the folks that are being considered for the Mcall Mcbean Scholars Finalist Prize. And those who are selected as the scholars actually receive a full ride scholarship to study law at the faculty, in addition to a living stipend, which is very generous. And I think can support many students. So in this past year's incoming cohort, we had 5 total finalists. 3 of those actually were chosen as scholars. So it's very exciting. They have a very early deadline, so it's actually already passed for folks who are applying for the fall 2023 cycle. But for anyone who's watching this, who's applying for fall 2024, keep in mind Mcall Mcbean Scholars is available to you. So I do encourage you to visit their website for more information. We also have at the faculty our law entrance scholarships. So all university and mature applicants and any CEGEP or QFB applicants who fall below the academic thresholds that are sent by Central Mcgill Scholarships and Student Aid Office are automatically considered. Approximately 30% of admitted students receive one, and the offers are made from February through September. And I'll say here that for anyone who is offered a Mcall Mcbean award, that would be considered an award to the Faculty of Law. We have a limited number that can go out, and so we really want to make sure that the money that's available to any incoming law student is divided up as equally as possible. In terms of the McGill University entrance scholarships and bursaries, McGill entrance scholarships are really only available to those applying from CEGEP or QFB who are above the academic thresholds. So they're not eligible to anyone who's coming in with a previous undergraduate degree. That's just university policy. But they do have bursaries available that are available to anyone who fulfills the financial need criteria, regardless of how many other degrees you may have completed before coming. And so you would need to complete the financial needs analysis through Minerva once you have been accepted to the program. So some key dates here that I just want to flag. So we're well into the applicant cycle already. The admission application opened online on September 15th. We have some key recruitment events over the next couple of weeks, really until the deadline on November 1st. So that is the application deadline for anyone who is in the university, mature, and advanced standing categories. November 8th is the supporting document deadline for those categories. March 1st is the applicant deadline for the CEGEP and QFB applicants, with March 7th being the supporting document deadline. And then the May 1st is the application, when the application closes for transfer applicants. So those are anyone who has completed at least 1 year of law studies at another Canadian law school. So I mentioned November is the latest Lsat that we recommend. We will accept the January test, but please consider how this may impact your application. December to June, this is when we make our offers of admission. These are extended on a rolling basis, and so we really are making offers over the course of many months. In February is when we have a welcome day for some early admitted candidates, and then we have generally held another one of these in June, which is more of a town hall where students can ask specific questions about registration, that kind of thing. So in terms of next steps, donc, déposez votre demande en ligne. On a une demande, c'est ça, sur le portail du candidat. So it's the Applicant Portal now. C'est plus Minerva. All the supporting documents have to be uploaded via the Applicant Portal, including the references. C'est très important de vérifier l'état de votre demande, vérifier vos courriels. Vous allez recevoir des communications via l'adresse courriel que vous avez soumis avec votre demande en ligne. So it's really important to keep up to date on your emails, check the Applicant Portal, because that's where you're going to be flagged if you need more information, if we need more information from you. So that pretty much covers what I wanted to chat about. I'm really excited now to turn things over to Stephanie, who is one of our current students at the faculty, one of our student ambassadors. She was really involved last year as a student ambassador, and is going to speak to you all this evening about a number of different things, including, preparation for law school, what it was like applying, what it's like now as a student. And so with that, I will mute myself and I will let her take things over for the next little while. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Sounds good. Thank you, Andrea, for all the lovely information. Alors, bonjour, mon nom est Stéphanie et je suis une étudiante de droit en deuxième année à Mcgill. Et aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir de partager un peu de mon expérience à Mcgill avec vous. Pour la majorité de cette présentation, je vais parler en anglais, mais je suis franco-ontarienne, très fière de ça, et heureux de répondre à vos questions plus tard dans n'importe quelle langue. So to provide you all a bit more about me and my background, I was born and raised in Mississauga, and before law school, I completed a Bachelor of Health Sciences at McMaster University, which is in Hamilton, Ontario. Alors, à McMaster, j'étais membre de l'équipe de natation synchronisée. C'est un sport unique, je le sais. And I was involved in student advocacy, particularly for issues impacting gender non-conforming students. I also conducted clinical research involving childhood cancer survivors and diabetes. After my undergrad, I was a little lost, so I worked in communications and graphic design for around a year before embarking on my law school journey. Thanks to my experiences as a law student, I'm especially curious about exploring the intersection between law, science, and communications and how they interact with each other. When I was an applicant, I was initially drawn to Mcgill Law because of its bilingual program and its increasing emphasis that it places on Indigenous legal traditions, which really stood out to me amongst the other schools that I was considering applying to. Also, as a queer, disabled, and non-binary person, I noticed the diversity of Mcgill Law's student body immediately. The way Mcgill Law truly embraces people's differences is what has kept me here and what has made my experience such a positive one. Afin de préparer ma candidature pour Mcgill Law, il y a 2 années, j'ai fait exactement ce que vous faites en ce moment. I attended an information session in the fall, like you are right now, and I wasn't shy about reaching out to the admissions team to ask them to connect me with student ambassadors. I also made sure that I didn't leave things to the last minute, which is often easier said than done. I started working on my materials as early as I could. I spent a lot of time refining it and editing it, and I really reflected a lot on my motivations for applying to Mcgill Law specifically and why I would be a good addition to the Mcgill Law community, and did my best to convey that in my application materials. Overall, the Mcgill Law student experience has gone above and beyond my expectations. My friends and peers are multi-talented and brilliant individuals. In my classes, I found them to be engaging and thought-provoking. I'm constantly learning new things, and the program makes me eager to keep learning both outside and inside the classroom. Additionally, as a student at Mcgill Law, there are lots of opportunities, which Andrea mentioned earlier, to get involved and give back to the community, which was really important to me as an applicant. I volunteer weekly as a caseworker with the Legal Information Clinic at Mcgill, where I provide accessible legal information to our community members in both French and English. And I'm also involved with the Mcgill Law Students Association. I'm also president of Mcgill Outlaw, which is a club dedicated to supporting our 2S LGBTQIA community and its allies through events and programming that happen throughout the year. So with a wide array of student and community organizations to get involved with, I'm really a firm believer that there is truly something here for everyone at Mcgill Law. Applying to law school, I want to acknowledge, can feel like such a daunting experience, especially if you don't know others who have gone through the process and you feel like you don't have that support system in place. But I want to highlight that attending this session is already a step in the right direction. And I hope that me sharing a bit about myself has provided you with a bit of insight into what Mcgill Law is like, at least from a student's perspective. Je pense qu'il y aura du temps plus tard pour les questions spécifiques sur mon expérience, mais n'hésitez pas à contacter l'équipe des admissions. Ils sont fantastiques, et spécialement si vous souhaitez discuter davantage avec d'autres étudiants à Mcgill Law. Et merci pour votre attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Merci beaucoup pour ceci. I always love hearing about what our current law students are doing, which is why I love so much working with student ambassadors, because oftentimes we admit the students and then we never hear from them again. And I'm always so inspired when I'm looking at applicant files, and I'm sad to never hear from them and what they're doing. So Merci beaucoup pour d'avoir partagé vos expériences, Stéphanie. C'est très apprécié. So that covers really the substantive portion of the presentation. We have a good amount of time set aside now for questions. So I'm happy to answer questions. I see that the Q&A and the chat, mostly the Q&A has been the most popular with regards to questions specifically. And Kelly's been doing a great job of answering some of those on the fly. So we'll turn over to answering questions, mais entre-temps, je veux vous diriger vers notre diapo ici pour plus d'informations sur comment nous contacter. Donc, il y a en premier lieu notre site internet, donc www.mcgill.ca/Mcgill/Bcljd. On a aussi notre adresse courriel admission.la@mcgill.ca. Et l'autre lien vers le bas de la page, c'est un lien pour planifier ou céduler une rencontre avec un des membres de notre équipe. So this is really a one-on-one chance for you to meet with a member of our admissions advising team. There are 15-minute blocks, so you can book one, and then if you have other questions, you can also book follow-up one afterwards. But this is a really great way of meeting us virtually. On est aussi en personne à la faculté. On est là Kelly, remind me or correct me if I'm wrong, but it's Tuesdays and Thursdays that we have our office hours at the faculty. But they're if you want to find out more about that, you can send us an email, visit our website, and find out more about when we're there. But we are back in person, at least some of the time. Okay, thanks, Kelly. Thanks for confirming. So yes, Tuesdays and Thursdays, sort of in the middle of the day. So we'd be really happy to see you if you can come by in person. So what I will do at this point is I'll focus in on some of the questions that have come in the Q&A. And I'm just wondering here if I can make my little Q&A box bigger so I can actually see what you all have been asking. Okay, there were some questions about what percentage of the applicant pool have already graduate degree and what does that do to aid in admission. So that's it. So 12% of our admitted applicants from 2021 had a graduate degree. In terms of what it does in aiding in admission, we're using your CGPA from your undergraduate degree to really compare you to the other applicants in the pool. But it is helpful for some people who, maybe have done much better in their graduate studies to have that information as well. Obviously, if there's a specific area of law that you've become interested in through the course of your graduate degree and you can kind of speak to that in your personal statement, that's also helpful. Folks who have graduate degrees also tend to be older, come in with a bit more life experience, a bit different perspective. So that's also an interesting element of a graduate profile. But, I would say we don't have necessarily any preference against or for graduate students. It just happens that, many of our students end up coming in with graduate degrees. There was a question about whether or not we review applications in the order that they applied. No, we don't. We wait really until all of the files have been submitted after the November deadline and we start looking at them like that. We don't have a particular way in which we look at them. They're looked at. In terms of providing or writing volunteer hours or reporting, volunteer hours from as far back as 2017. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can include it in your CV. I would say if you're a student who's applying from university, maybe putting volunteer experiences from high school is not necessarily as relevant for us, just likely because you've had more time pass. But I know that the pandemic has had a big impact on folks' ability to become involved in different activities. And so maybe, between 2020 and this year, you haven't had as much, but, what you were doing back in 2017 was really relevant to your interests in law. So for sure, if you can fit it in there and you want to add it, feel free to do so. I see some questions about grades and whether or not you're competitive. And, we are looking for, like I said, we're looking for a competitive application, but we're also, because we have a holistic review process, we're going to be looking at your transcript in depth, right? So even if your CGPA might be a 3.0, the admissions committee is going to be able to see the courses that you've taken, maybe see the class averages that are present. So if you're, if you come out with a 3.0, but the class average was a 2.3, you're not doing so bad, right? In a comparative relative way to the cohort that you were in for your undergraduate degree. So maybe relative to the overall applicant pool, your grade might not seem as high. We are able to kind of drill down and see a little bit more what was going on in your undergraduate. Yes, all the CGPAs are going to be verified and corrected if necessary by our office. So we do a first review where we really kind of go through all the self-reported GPAs and make sure the person used the right scale and adjust things as necessary. We might change or make adjustments to your CGPA based on the information that you submitted in your extenuating circumstances. I see a question about the Institute of Air and Space Law and whether or not we accept professionals of the airline industry. We definitely do. They have some great graduate programs, but I also have seen folks apply to the Bcljd program and be accepted as sort of, professional airline, employees in whatever capacity. So depending on how long you may have been out of school for and working in that career, you would be automatically considered to be a mature applicant. So feel free, Kelly put in the grad law admissions email address, so you can ask questions of them. You're also more than welcome to get in touch with our office if you want to chat a little bit more. Yes, we got a great question about building rapport with current university professors during the pandemic. And this is something that a lot of folks have asked me about at in-person recruitment events, and is a very valid, reality concern. I can't imagine what it was like for a lot of people to study remotely during the pandemic. I really feel for anyone who had to go through, some formative years of university studying remotely. And I totally recognize that this may have impacted your ability to build those connections with professors. So the committee knows the reality that we've all been living through in the last couple of years. And we're gonna review references, referees, and CVs, and really everything that you submit with that in mind. And so, try as best as you can to get at least one academic reference, but if the other one needs to be professional, try as best as you can to find someone who's able to answer those key questions about, eligibility, or not eligibility, academic abilities and personal attributes. And, if that person isn't necessarily a full professor, that's okay. Just try your best to get at least one academic reference from someone who can support those attributes. In terms of when the earliest admissions decisions will be released for next fall, we generally send out a handful of decisions sometime in December. A lot depends on how busy it is and how many applications we get and how organized we're able to be in our office, but we do try and get out a small number before we break for the winter holiday. But really, the bulk of the decisions are going to start going out in January and February. And so if you don't get your decision in December, January, February, it doesn't really have any bearing on the strength of your application. It's just the way in which the process works. I see a question about uploading official transcripts from college or university, or is unofficial okay? You are more than welcome to submit your unofficial transcripts. We only require official transcripts once you've been admitted to the faculty. But as I was mentioning earlier, it's always helpful for the committee to have access to transcripts that might show your class averages. And I know sometimes that unofficial transcripts don't have that, but I also know that that official transcripts cost money. And so you can definitely submit your unofficial transcripts if that's what you're able to do at this point. No worries there. A three-part question. Okay, great. Joint programs such as Bcljd and MBA program, and that could be added in your first year. Yes, that's true. Yeah, so you can decide if you want to embark on a joint program once you've already started in the law faculty. What I would say here is just make sure that you would fulfill the requirements of the other program that you might want to be applying into, so the MBA or the Masters of Social Work. So I believe the MBA has, you know, a certain undergraduate degree requirement, but then also requires a certain amount of work experience. So keep that in mind. And for the MSW, you do have to be coming in with a bachelor's of social work. So if you have more questions about that, feel free to take a look at our website, or I would say get in touch with, you know, if you want more information about admissions to the other two programs, get in touch with their admissions offices. So the Desautels Faculty of Management for the MBA, or the Mcgill School of Social Work for the Masters of Social Work program. Yes, so it was also mentioned that our references will be a source to confirm our French competency. That's true. If this is, yes, that's true. So should you ask your selected reference to mention your French capabilities? So there's actually a spot in the reference form where the referee will be prompted to comment on the level of French that you have. They have to rank you, you know, relative to others that they may have seen. So it's, or to provide sort of an estimate of the level that you have. So low, beginner, low, medium, high, intermediate, that sort of thing. So there's actually a spot in the reference form. They don't necessarily need to comment on it separately. Yes, regarding Mcall Mcbean. So individuals who are applying for the fall 2023 fall admissions had to apply even before their application. If that is the case, can individuals who are applying for the fall 2023 fall admission cycle still apply for the scholarship for 2024? So really the Mcall Mcbean scholarship is really only for students, first year students, so students who are entering the program. So if you applied for next fall, you got into the Mcgill Law program, you would no longer be eligible to apply for the Mcall Mcbean scholarship process. So I think that's what you're asking. Please feel free to clarify in the Q&A, but I think that's what you were asking. Another question, does the admission system put aside the R-score if a bachelor's degree have been completed, or are both measures looked at? We will have access to your R-score, but we're really, if you're applying in the university category, we're really going to be using your CGPA as the main comparator between other applicants in the pool. You know, we put little bearing on the R-score just because it's, you know, not necessarily a good indicator of your academic abilities now. CEGEP is a different type of program. It's a different time in your life. There are many factors that make it very different than when you're applying with a bachelor's degree. If I'm a CEGEP student, I apply in February, or other applications going to be reviewed before mine, and is this going to affect my application? So yes, so the CEGEP applicants have a much later deadline than the rest of the applicant pool. They also make up a much smaller proportion of our admitted class every year. We only admit generally between 30 and 40 CEGEP students every year, and they tend to make up around 25 to 35 of our incoming class. So it's a more competitive pool for sure. We take far fewer than in our regular pool. So you know, yes, it will impact your application. And we won't start looking at CEGEP applicants until the March 1st deadline. In terms of the types of questions that are often asked during interviews, this is a great question. So again, really it's about assessing your analytical abilities, your curiosity, your ability to kind of think on the spot, maybe play devil's advocate if needed. I've often heard, because the questions vary from interviewer to interviewer, but oftentimes what the interviewers will do is they'll ask you a question related to something that's been in the news recently. So what I always recommend to CEGEP students who are coming for an interview is to read the news. Make sure you're up to date on the news in the last week or so, because very often they're going to try and prompt you with something that has been in the news recently. So yeah, again, it's really about just assessing how you can think on the fly and answer questions that way. This is a really interesting question. So are there any quote unquote trigger terms to avoid in personal statements? I've been advised to avoid using passionate, or I've always ... X. What are my thoughts on this? I mean, I think if you're passionate about something, you can totally say that you're passionate about something. But I think what's most important and what really shines through for in personal statements for me is that there's a clear connection that's been made between the personal statement and the other elements. And the personal statement is really sort of the thread that ties it all together. And so, you know, you might end up using these, what you call trigger terms. But as long as you're doing so in an intelligent, authentic, clear, comprehensive way, then that's fine. I'm interested to hear that these are words or terms that you've been advised to not use. But certainly when I read them, my back doesn't go up when I read the word passionate. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think I've answered all the questions that came through the Q&A at this point. I'm not sure if there are any that have come through in the chat. I'll just check there quickly. I saw some things. Oh, I think it's Kelly that's been very helpfully adding links in. I'm not sure if anyone has any specific questions for our student ambassador, Stephanie, so that we can let Stephanie go on with the evening. But any other questions for either myself or Stephanie or Kelly? Oh, I see a hand that has been raised. So the WebEx webinar software, unfortunately, I don't think allows participants to actually unmute themselves or show their video. Please correct me if I'm wrong, the person who raised their hand. But if you want, you can ask a question in the chat and I'd be happy to answer it. Or if you're able to, please unmute yourself. I don't know that it's even possible. Otherwise, yeah, feel free to pose your question in the Q&A or the chat box, and we'd be happy to answer. Maybe in the meantime, while we're waiting for the person who raised their hand, I'm getting a thumbs down. I'm sorry, everyone. We're just not able to do the unmute. It's just it's the software. It's just how it works. This is a software that's mandated by Mcgill, and it just allows us to do some things and doesn't allow us to do other things. But again, feel free to ask. Here's a question. Is there a forum, or perhaps informally, to ask Stephanie or other ambassadors questions, read their experiences? So in terms of another forum or informally, yes, we definitely offer the opportunity for prospective students to connect one-on-one with our student ambassadors. So we're in the process of getting the student ambassador kind of community finalized for this incoming year. But Stephanie is one of our returning student ambassadors, and so would be a good person for you to speak to. Stephanie, I don't know if you want to chat a little bit about your experience doing this last year, because I know you had a lot of conversations with incoming students. I remember seeing a lot of those come through. Not to put you on the spot. Oh, you're muted. Can I unmute you? There you are.
Okay, great. Sorry, it wouldn't let me unmute.
The gremlins are in the system. They're working.
Yeah, I know it's a little wonky, but that's okay. Essentially, as a student ambassador, we're really here to just, at least in my experience, like I talked to lots of people when they were applicants, and now I know them now that they're at Mcgill, which is really interesting. But I think essentially I'm just able to kind of provide my experience. So certain people had questions about what is it like to work part-time during the school year? What is it like to move across the country? What is it like to move, just random questions that you may not feel necessarily comfortable asking an admissions officer, although you probably could and they would be happy to answer. But just in terms of that student experience, I found it really helpful because it's just obviously, and if I'm not your cup of tea, that's totally okay. There's a team of student ambassadors, and once they're finalized, they will be posted. And if you want to talk to any of them, if something they've said in their bio really resonates with you, you have a similar background, whatever it may be, then you're welcome to reach out to the admissions email that Kelly popped in to the chat, and then you can schedule essentially either you can just do it by email. I've done that. I've had one-on-one calls with people. It's really up to your preference. We kind of let you lead in terms of what you're looking for. Obviously, like we don't do things like I don't read applications, like I don't advise on what I think, because obviously like I'm not privy to secret information. There's no secret formula to get into Mcgill law. It's really holistic, like Andrew has highlighted really well throughout this presentation. So if you're curious to like see if like, oh, is Mcgill law somewhere that I can picture myself, or like if you have a question about what the food's like or what Montreal is like, or honestly anything that kind of springs to your mind, we're really here to help support you and answer those kinds of questions.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate that response. And I'm happy that you said that there's no secret formula, because that's very true. A lot of people ask me like, well, what do I need to do? Like, what's going to get me in for sure? And it's like, I can't tell you. Like, I'm the one that decides, but I really can't tell you, because it also changes from year to year, right? Like the pool changes quite a bit from year to year. And so what makes an application really strong one year might, be a little bit different the year before. I mean, in general, everyone is pretty amazing, right? Applying, and we get so many applications from so many amazing people, and unfortunately have to refuse a lot of amazing people, but there really is no secret formula. But one question that we got in the chat, Stephanie, that I think you might be able to answer was whether or not you had advice on the personal statement that might differ from the advice I've already given.
Yeah, so I think, like you mentioned, the classic answer is like, answer why, like why Mcgill law, like why you. But I think my advice is, in most application processes, and maybe this is wrong, but my advice is to be as authentic as possible to yourself, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be inauthentic and say that you are passionate about all these things and like just like be like not genuine, and then end up in an environment where, like, not that Mcgill law is a bad environment, but if you like really don't like a bilingual transsystemic environment, but you say you do, for example, then there's like friction in that. And like I just think I'm a huge believer of like, you will end up where you're kind of meant to be, and it may take you multiple tries, and obviously everyone faces different obstacles. But I think my advice is just like, be really genuine, and like that'll shine through on your application. I guarantee it. Like it'll come through that you've been true to yourself, true to your personality, true to your lived experiences. That would be like my biggest tip. I know it sounds cheesy, but it is what it is. And I think also, like, you can obviously like be critical of of those 750 words, because they are important. It's your why, it's your story. But at a certain point, like, it's okay to like, once you've edited it and edited it and edited it, it is okay to accept it for what it is. And when you're ready to submit those application materials, I think, at least me, I struggle with a tendency to kind of over edit my work. And I kind of had to stop myself and say, you know what, like, I'm putting my best foot forward. I've spent X amount of hours working on this. Like, I've done my best, and now it's in the hands of other folks, and we'll see like what the result is. So that's kind of my two pieces of advice, is just really trust the process and be genuine throughout the process, because that way, no matter what, you gave it you put that best foot forward.
That's great advice. Very, very wise and very true. And like, I really do believe that the strongest personal statements are the ones that are the most authentic, where it's clear that the person, again, is not just saying, I want to come to Mcgill because it's bilingual and it's transsystemic and it's pluralistic and it's comparative, and without it really feeling like that's true about the person. So, yeah, taking the time. And sometimes I've seen personal statements where there's some real honesty and some people bearing their souls, and that's hard. It's hard to be that vulnerable and that honest sometimes in a document that strangers are going to read. And I'm not saying everyone has to do that, but those have stood out to me, right? Because they do feel very authentic. And the editing thing is big. There's a point where you have to just say, it's done. I can't change it anymore. And, if you don't end up getting into Mcgill law, as Stephanie said, maybe it wasn't meant to be, maybe you were meant to go somewhere else. And there are, you know, many, many, many amazing law schools across Canada, across the country, and in the US and internationally as well. And law's not for everybody. You know, a lot of people start out in law and decide it's not for them. This is not to discourage anyone from applying, but just, you know, it's important to be honest with yourself about where you want to go and where you may want to end up. Okay, so the person who asked the question, Stephanie, said, thank you so much. That was amazing advice, which I totally agree with. So thank you. I don't see any other questions coming in the Q&A or in the chat. Stephanie, would you like to say something?
Oh, I thought I saw something in the chat, but maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, it's possible. Been looking at the Q&A. Something did come in the chat.
Yeah, I think something came in the chat about reapplicants.
Oh, yes.
Yes, reapplicants. Please discuss reapplicants.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for flagging that. So this is a great question, and I want to just preface it by saying that we are having a special information session next Wednesday evening from 4:30 p.m. Eastern to 6 p.m. Eastern for reapplicants specifically. So we will be going through all of this in greater detail and sort of some of the things you have to think about. But from a practical standpoint, because we have moved from one application system to another, there are some limitations with regard to how previous application materials can be sort of imported into the new system. And so as with in the past, your personal statement, we always encourage you, or we require you to submit a new personal statement with every new application. And the new application is really what we're going to be looking at when we're assessing your candidacy. But we also like to look back at your previous applications to see if there's been changes made to your personal statement, if you've really taken, you know, really thought about how to improve your application, if you've taken other courses, if you've, you know, done further activities, that sort of thing. So this year, we will not be able to share your previous application in the same database as your new application, but a member of the admissions committee will be looking at previous files of reapplicants to kind of assess whether or not there's been an improvement, there's been a change in the application. It just won't happen in the same way. So that was a really roundabout way of saying yes, but just not in the same way that it's been done in the past. But you do have to resubmit. You basically have to submit a new application this year. So new references using the new reference form, a new CV, new transcripts, new personal statement, all of that information, all of the required information, supporting documents have to be uploaded into the applicant portal. So I hope that answers the question. But like I said, there is the workshop next week. And thank you, Kelly, for putting in the event link in the Q&A or in the chat box for that question specifically. Okay. Any last questions? Again, if you didn't want to ask your question this evening or didn't think of it and think of it after, please get in touch with us. We also have some open advising sessions. So there's the one-on-one advising that's happening. There are going to also be open advising sessions happening over the next 4 weeks. So Kelly ran a really successful one yesterday. There's going to be another one on Friday, 2 next week, 2 the week after, and 2 the week after that. So lots of opportunities for you to chat. And I think what we'll do is, unless there are any last questions, final call here. I'm going to thank Stephanie very much for participating. We really, really appreciate you being available on such short notice again. Thank you so much, Kelly, for handling all the questions coming in. Merci à tous et à toutes d'être parmi nous ce soir ou cet après-midi ou ce matin, dépendamment d'où vous êtes dans le monde. On apprécie beaucoup votre présence. On vous souhaite une bonne chance pour le processus de demande. We wish you, great luck for the application process. And I hope that I will be able to, meet some of you at some point as students at the Faculty of Law. So Thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.